So this is our super high level executive summary. We've got lots of different queues in here, but we're just kind of focused in on one. And we're going to start with high level information about what's going on in this queue. And some of this information, some of this data you'll be familiar with in terms of number of calls and number of minutes and agents, and none of that stuff is new. But we are deliberately calling out the fact that, leaving aside automation for a minute, like we think automation can really change how contact centers work. But if you disagree, and maybe by the end we might change your mind, but if you disagree, I think we can agree that even without any automation at all, call verification is a time sink. So if you did call automation, what would it mean to your contact center? So we can pull out the time that gets spent in every call doing call verification. And so we total that up and give you a total number of minutes for the time spent doing call verification. So if you need an ROI for putting in a biometric system, like a voice ID system, to do your IDV, this can give you that. Also underneath that, you can see as well, we've categorized a large portion of these calls in this particular queue as being automatable. So we think these calls could benefit from some level of automation. And then if we did that, this is, the amount of minutes that would be saved. This is the kind of the saving that you can make as part of doing that. And so the idea is to really allow agents to concentrate on more complicated and more complex calls by taking the ones that are very simple and automatable and giving them to automation, allowing agents to really focus on the calls that matter.
So it's my job now to put on my skeptic hat and say, that's great. How lovely. Another set of data dashboards, because we didn't have enough data, right? Here's more data.
Have some more data.
How does this, more data. How does this help me build a business case? How does this help me actually make real decisions that could have a real life impact on how my contact center runs? So we're going to stick with this, with the insurance company contact center, and we're going to take a look at what a customer experience is. So we're going to follow Ramesh for a little while. So everyone meet Ramesh. He's very fortunate. He's just moved to the house of his dreams, and he needs to update his address on his insurance policy information. Unfortunately, he can't do this online, so he calls in. Now, he and 7,000 other calls in this month go into this queue, and that takes 29% of all all calls to this queue, which works out at 44,000 minutes for the month. Now, I can hear you saying, like, how do you know, like, that address change is 29% of the categories in the queue? Like, you've gone down a level in the queue. And that is the power, the AI power of Apollo, because it does the job of a team of people who have to, like, read through reams and reams and rows of data, and Apollo can do it for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to steal the share back again because to kind of demonstrate that point. And also, I think the other thing you're thinking is you need to prove this, Tom, because you like this massive green number here, like, prove it, please. And that's fair. I'm going to come down to the category overview section here. And now this is the real power of Apollo, really. We're still looking at a single queue, but inside this queue, the calls have now been categorized. Okay, so you can see the different types of calls that happen inside of this queue. And I can choose the address change one, and I can see those percentages. I can see the things. And I can see as well, like, how many of these calls are simple calls, how many are complicated, and how many are complex. I can see how much time is spent doing verification, and I can see the average call duration. So I'm now able to answer some of these questions and really start to understand what happens inside these queues. And something really interesting happens as part of, when we do this with customers, we go in and we select queues to look at, and we ask them, we say, like, what's your queue about? And they'll tell us, our queue's about A, B, and C. And we go away and analyze the data. And we find normally that, yes, it is about A and B, and sometimes it's about C, often not, but it's also about D, E, F, and G. They had no idea. And bringing it to the focus, it allows you to really think through, Do I want those kind of calls in that queue? Would they be better served in another queue? Would they be better served elsewhere? So this is starting to really dig into the powerful part of Apollo with being able to break queues up into categories and think about them in terms of the types of calls that are happening really makes a difference.
So I'm starting to be convinced, starting to be impressed. Let's say, though, that Ramesh called at 5 p.m. on a Wednesday, and he waits in the queue for 2 minutes. Apollo isn't just going to tell me that 2.5 minutes is the average wait time for this queue. It's also going to tell me how well the agents are being scheduled compared to this particular date and time.
Yep, I'm going to show you that as well. So queue time is obviously a thing that you can get out of Connect already. The thing here that we're showing, and I've come down, I did it whilst you weren't watching. I came down to one of the advanced reports because we think this is quite important. So we have a dedicated report out here for queue time, and it's got the queue times and it's the max and the averages as you'd expect, but it's also got it by category, and you can choose one of these categories. So I can choose the address change category, and I can see. And this data is it's demo data, right? So it's not perfect, but you can kind of see the idea here. You'll be able to, choose your category and then really interrogate things like queue time, but for very specific categories. And that can be really important for understanding what agents do when and when you need to put the right agents in at the right times. But it's also important for thinking about things like automation, because you can start to see now, okay, if I put some automation in around one very specific thing, what's the impact it's going to have across the estate, across lots of different things, such as queue time, such as just number of calls, but also, these other things as well. So you can sort of see exactly when calls about specific things are happening and when people are waiting to talk about them.
I'm going to go one step further than that as well, because Apollo isn't just about this AI deep dive into the data. Apollo is also about understanding the business context and insights. So how did the agent who answers Ramesh call get there? So we're going to take a quick dip into the business process that sits behind this queue. And what we find here, almost before we've started, is that the agents are being manually scheduled on a fortnightly basis. So managers for this team are going in every 2 weeks and they're spending about 2 hours manually assigning agents to different shift patterns across this queue in this contact center. That's without even considering vacation requests, overtime, ad hoc, sickness, etc. Now, many of you on this call will probably already know, but for those of you who don't, things like Amazon Connect have really powerful predictive forecasting, scheduling, and capacity planning tools that integrate into the same tool set that agents are working in and day out to receive and to handle contacts. So that's a massive opportunity for improvement, for time saved, and also for removing manual or legacy systems which might have a high rate of human error or are just wasting time, to be perfectly honest, when an agent could be on the line to a real person who needs help. So let's head back to the call. Ramesh has got through to the agent, and because he needs to update his profile with his new address, he goes through ID verification. Now, for Ramesh, he fumbles a little bit. He can't find the exact information he needs. He's just moved house. He gets his verification wrong. And so he spends 3 minutes, 30 seconds on IDV in this particular interaction. That's unusual. We know from the data that that's the longest duration in this month that anyone has spent on ID verification in this queue category. On average, though, it's 46 seconds. Now, this insurance contact center has, for this month, about 70,000, just over 70,000 calls. Now, let's take a conservative estimate and say that half of those required ID verification. So that's 46 seconds of agent time multiplied by 35,000 calls. So those minutes start adding up. really quickly, don't they, Tom?
They do. It's huge. And we do think that this ID verification piece is really important. It's why we surface it on the executive dashboard. And it's important for all the things Eliza just said around agent time, but it's also the fundamentals, like the building block, the stepping stone of getting into automation. Because if you can automate the call verification, that identity verification part, it really opens up the possibilities for what you can do. Because once you're sure you know who the person is, then you can do all sorts of things around bringing back their data, taking action on their behalf, automating processes without, you're really kind of opening up your possibilities there. So yeah, we think it's really, really important. And so even if you don't actually plan to do any automation today, I still think it's something you should look into, and yeah, just see what would be involved. And because the tech is pretty amazing. There's stuff built into Amazon Connect to do it. There's partners that can help you take it further. There's lots of stuff there. But yeah, we think it's important. That's why we put it on the executive dashboard. And actually, we have a dedicated advanced report for it. Again, goes into detail about how long it takes in average and maxes, again, across different call categories, because it might well be, depending on what you're doing, address change might be quite a good one, but there might be worse ones as well. And so you might want to sort of think about that and how you get into that. So yeah, identification, important.
So let's follow Ramesh to the end of his journey today. So he's updated his address details. He's spent just under 7 minutes on this call, plus 2 minutes waiting. Now, we know from Apollo that on average, the 29% of calls that go into this queue about address changes are about 5 to 6 minutes duration on average. His ID verification has skewed that slightly. And he's happy. His call's been resolved, his address details have been updated, maybe not overjoyed that he had to call in to make this change, but all is well. And this is when Apollo goes one step further. It doesn't just surface all of these kind of cross-silo, cross-sample, deep dive pieces of data to help you tell a story. It evaluates them as well. So 29% of this queue, as you will have seen from Tom's dashboards, was about 7,000 calls. And Apollo is telling us that 96% of those 7,000 calls, it considers simple. Now, I'm going to hand over to Tom to walk you through the kind of the training and the rationale that goes behind that rating. But in essence, what Apollo means is that it thinks there's potential to automate, at least in part, 96% of that 7,000 call. And that's a single month's worth of data.
Yeah, this is definitely another one of those prove it moments, isn't it? So
do it, okay, prove it.
So let's come back to the category overview page where we were talking about address changes, and we can see here 96% automatable calls. So yeah, it's natural to say, okay, how do you come to that number? What's a simple call? Show you're working. So we've got a scoring dash report, and at the moment I've filtered it just on the on the address change call category, so we can look at these. And yeah, there is this high sort of bar for simple calls. Now, the way this works, we categorize these calls into these 3 buckets of simple, complicated, and complex, and they're based on a number of different parameters, some of which are on the screen here. So things like, we can extract the number of questions that get asked during the call and whether they're asked by the agent or the customer. So the more customer questions get asked, the more complicated we deem the call to be. The amount of non-talk time spent on hold, time spent in silence between the agent and the customer, again, it's another trigger point for that might be a more complicated call. The amount of agent talk time, again, the more of that there is, the more complicated the call is likely to be. And then the general duration as well feeds into. So we take these metrics, a bunch of other metrics as well, and then we come up with a scoring system. It's a weighted scoring system that allows us then to put calls into these buckets. And the reason for doing this isn't kind of because it makes nice looking graphs. The point is to give you a handle on what to do next, because just automating isn't realistic. Nor is it specific, and nor is it likely to achieve the outcomes you want for the money you spend. the idea is here to tell you where to start, to give you like what's the lowest of low hanging fruits. Where should I start if I want to get into doing automation? So by putting them in these buckets, which are relative anyway, not absolute, it allows you to say, okay, if I was going to start somewhere, where should I start? Should it be address changes? Should it be order details? Should it be shipping? Should it be complaints? Gives you those relative values to understand where to start, and then where you can kind of go and make the biggest difference.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff. But it's not, as I said, just about using AI to surface this data. We also lay over what's happening in the business context and the processes behind the scenes. And what's happening here is that after Ramesh has hung up and the agent fills in his after call or her after call work, what we're seeing in this particular contact center is that they've got very limited reporting and very manual quality management processes. So again, this is another area where making improvements filters back through into the experience that the customer gets, into ensuring the consistency of the customer experience, and also into making sure that your data is dynamic and relevant and able to answer the questions that you're posing to it. So I think we can all agree that Ramesh here has had quite a simple journey. As Tom said, this is definitely an example of low-hanging fruit. And this isn't all Apollo can do. So I decided that we wanted to challenge Apollo a little bit further. So same month, same set of data, but we're now going to look at a different queue, because over the weekend, poor Ramesh in his new house has suffered from a bit of a freak storm, and there's quite a lot of property damage, which he's not very happy about. And he now needs to get in touch again with his insurance company, work out what his policy covers and how he can start making his claims. So he calls back. Unfortunately for Ramesh, he is one of 34,000 calls that the contact center is going to receive as a result of this freak storm. This 34,000 makes up 67% of the general queue. And believe it or not, I mean, I believe it, but I can barely say the numbers, over 300,000 minutes. I always stumble over that one because it just seems, it's like, you know, how many minutes fill an aeroplane? It's a lot, feels like a lot. Now, he calls back same day, same time, and unfortunately, it's a 19-minute wait, because he's queuing with the 34,000 other people who have got storm damage and they need to get in touch to take action. But what's interesting here is that all of that amazing predictive forecasting and automated scheduling and capacity planning based on historic trends isn't equipped to deal with this. This is an out of the ordinary, you know, freak event. But that doesn't mean there aren't technical options that can be leveraged to mitigate the impact on the contact center of this kind of activity.
Yep, definitely. I'm just going to take everyone back to this category overview page for a second, which is where we sort of were before. And up till now, we've only been looking at a single queue. But I can change the queue selection here. We've been looking at accounts and technical issues because we were looking at address changes. There is another queue here, the general queue. That usually kind of ends up taking all the calls that don't end up anywhere else. So if we flip over to that, and yikes, we've got this big outlier here that looks different from how the previous queue looked. And you can see this like big influx of calls about one very particular thing that was not planned. Spikes like this, they're going to show up on the Amazon Connect dashboards as well, and they're a really useful metric, real-time metric to see what's going on and to deal with the operational kind of agent planning and all that kind of side of things. And it will show up in increased wait times as well, so something is wrong. In a small contact center, you might be able to get a sense of what's happening just by talking to agents and just kind of getting the feel of the room. But it can be hard, especially remote as well. It can be hard to get to the bottom of exactly why a spike is happening and what you should do about it, and what is it that people are searching for? Are they searching for some information? Are they looking to do something? What are they trying to do? And so this is where this can really help. The queue time report down here that we looked at before as well, that can help as well, because it will pull out where people are waiting a long time, the types of calls that end up talking about. And once you know the reason, now you're in so much better position now. Just looking at this graphic, you know exactly what to do. And you've got your technical options now that you know actually what it is you're supposed to do. And for a technical person like me, this is great because I don't know anything about the business, but I know now I probably need an automated message. Maybe I need a new IVR message at the head of the queue to deflect, or maybe deflect to an overflow agent capacity. I might think about doing some proactive SMS messaging, email messaging, or some other platform that's not a contact center. Online SMS, whatever in the app, whatever it is, just to try and deflect and bring those numbers down in a way that I couldn't if I didn't know why. If I just knew there was a lot of activity and I don't know why. So yeah, knowing the category is really, really important.
So Ramesh has waited 19 minutes, but he gets through to his agent. He does a bit of verification because he wants to kick things off with his policy and his claims, and it takes the 46 seconds that we know it does on average. But Ramesh, even though he's got a good outcome, he's had his call resolved, his claims being processed, he knows that some of the repair work is going to be covered. He's been on this call for over 20 minutes. He's not going to be super happy. And Apollo looked at the 34,000 calls in this category and was like, yeah, 63% of them are meeting that simple criteria, that single request, that, no transfers, no hold time. There is, as Tom said, there's high potential and opportunity for automation here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as we finish, Tom will talk a little bit more about CSAT and the impact of that, because we're all about customer service as well.
Yeah, definitely. And there's lots of things we can do here as well, like knowing that those calls are simple. Now you could look at dealing with, for instance, as part of our managed service thing, we do like a rapid response package where, you can have something ready to go. Some of that stuff I talked about having a recorded message, getting into your IVR and putting an emergency message at the top and doing all those kind of things. We've got some kind of exciting stuff that we've been working on recently about how we can kind of take this information and maybe automate that process. So watch this space if that sounds of interest to you, because we're working on some cool stuff. But yeah, no, as Eliza said as well, this is a really interesting example actually, because it reminded us of something as well, which was customer satisfaction, and CSAT is really important. Some of the data that we take and put into Apollo is specifically around, was the customer satisfied with the outcome of the call? So what I mean by that is the thing that the customer set out to do on the call, did they get it done? Was the call resolved in that way? Not was the customer happy or sad or satisfied, was the customer satisfied with the outcome? And the reason that's important is if you think like customer satisfaction is a useful metric sometimes, but sometimes it can camouflage some things. And actually in our particular example, I doubt anybody calling up about this is particularly happy, right? If you're calling up because your house has been damaged by flood damage, you might have a technically perfect call. Your agent answered all your questions. You know exactly what you need to do, but you're still pretty grumpy, right? The sentiment on that call is never going to be great. And actually using sentiment as a scoring metric for agents can be dangerous in those kind of situations where everybody is sad all the time. So actually having a better way to do it, such as inferring, was the outcome met? Like the business outcome of this queue, is it being met? So we think that's a better metric, or at least a comparable metric to just out and out satisfaction.
Yeah. And I think the final takeaway from me is don't underestimate Apollo. We spent a lot of time today talking and showing you how it can surface using AI, these data insights, and overlay that with, business insights so that you not only can identify opportunities, but you can prioritize them and have the data you need to build a business case around them. And as a change manager, as someone who works in transformation, that's really exciting to me, because one of the hardest things to do in a transformation is to be able to tell a really compelling story of your change. And Apollo not only shows you all the things that you can do to improve or build towards a better way of providing your services, your customer interactions, it shows you what to do first. And you can use that to build a roadmap. And you can use the data it surfaces to really demonstrate to people why you are doing certain things in a certain order. And the power of that, yeah, it's really powerful. It shouldn't be underestimated. And I think that's what excites me most, because we know that 79% of technology transformations fail to deliver the expected results. I'm not saying that they fail altogether. I'm sure that most of them actually manage to introduce the new system or implement the new piece of technology. But the expected benefits that were written down in the business case are very rarely fully realized. And the way that Apollo works, it gives you the metrics that you need to measure, and it helps you get everyone on board on understanding what you're measuring and why it's going to make the business, their lives, the process flows better. So yeah, I'm a bit of an Apollo convert, I have to say.